What did the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, the delicate Japanese pottery art of kintsugi, and the remarkably busy brain of a 5-year-old child all have in common?
That is quite the lineup to start us off.
Right, it sounds like the setup to a really esoteric riddle. But the answer actually holds the key to fundamentally changing how you handle stress, adversity, and those daily cognitive loops you run on autopilot.
The autopilot we all get stuck on.
Exactly. Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're taking these seemingly completely disparate elements and using them to bypass the usual platitudes about mental fortitude.
Because there are a lot of platitudes out there.
So many. We're working from a comprehensive manual by Addison Bell titled Mental Training. And our mission for this deep dive is to shortcut your path to becoming truly well-informed on mental fortitude.
Right.
We're going to extract the core mechanics of resilience, break down this diagnostic framework known as the 7 C's, and expose the hidden habit loop that is quietly dictating your behavior.
It's a really necessary shift in how we approach the whole concept of fortitude. Because if you look at the pervasive cultural narrative, mental toughness is often framed as a genetic lottery ticket.
You either have it or you don't.
Right. There's this assumption that you're either born with a thick skin or you aren't. Or there's the equally damaging idea that being tough just means possessing this infinite capacity to grit your teeth and absorb punishment.
Just grin and bear it.
Exactly. But what the source text establishes immediately, and this is so important, is that mental toughness is not an innate trait. It's a highly trainable skill.
Which is such a relief.
It is. It's an architecture you can methodically construct entirely regardless of your current baseline.
And that reframing is crucial because it completely removes the expectation of innate invulnerability, which brings us to a fundamental distinction the author makes, the divergence between toughness and resilience.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Because in colloquial conversation, we tend to treat those terms as synonyms.
Yeah.
Right? We use them interchangeably. But the text applies a strict engineering lens to this, which completely alters the paradigm.
It really does. Because in engineering, for a material to be classified as resilient, sheer strength is completely insufficient. It must possess flexibility.
Psychological flexibility is the defining metric here.
Exactly. If you think about a rigid material, say a cast iron beam, it can bear a tremendous amount of weight.
Just tons of pressure.
Right. But the moment the stress exceeds its threshold, it snaps catastrophically. There's no bending. Mental resilience is not about resisting change like some bull-headed mammoth trying to endure a blizzard.
Right.
It's the capacity to absorb an impact, adapt to the new variables, and critically, to heal without snapping.
What's really compelling is how the text separates these two concepts operationally. The author positions resilience as the process and mental toughness as the end state.
What's fascinating here is the visual the author uses to cement this relationship. Think of a high-wire circus performer executing these incredibly complex, joyful acrobatics 80 feet in the air.
No fear at all.
Right. That performance, that ability to thrive under immense pressure, that is mental toughness. But the performer can only execute those maneuvers with that level of audacity because they know there is a safety net rigged right beneath them.
The net is the process.
Exactly. You cannot sustain the end state of mental toughness without continuously weaving the process of resilience to catch you when you inevitably lose your footing.
Because everyone loses their footing eventually. And to illustrate how we handle those inevitable falls, the book leverages the metaphor of kintsugi, which is that Japanese art of repairing broken porcelain.
It's a beautiful concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
Rather than using clear glue to hide the fractures or, just throwing the shattered bowl in the trash, the artist uses a lacquer mixed with powdered gold to rejoin the pieces. The repair itself becomes the focal point.
It highlights the damage rather than hiding it.
Yes, and the text applies this directly to psychological trauma and failure. For you listening, your mental dents and the times you have fractured, they aren't flaws or liabilities to conceal. The author actually refers to them as hard-won diplomas from the School of Hard Knocks.
Which is a highly pragmatic way to view psychological scarring, and the text provides historical precedent for this.
Yeah, Churchill?
Winston Churchill, yes. He is often caricatured as this bulldog of unshakable resolve who steered Britain through the Blitzkrieg. But Churchill was not naturally invulnerable. He battled severe lifelong depression, which he famously called his black dog.
Right.
He actively engineered his resilience. He developed rigorous passions for fencing, historical writing, painting. He had to learn how to restore hope in his own mind during periods of profound darkness.
And that specific practiced skill is exactly what allowed him to restore hope for an entire nation. He utilized his own goal to fill his internal fractures, and that made him uniquely equipped for his external environment.
Perfectly said.
The book also details Helen Keller's trajectory through this exact same lens. She didn't achieve global impact in spite of being deaf and blind. She leveraged her profound empathy and her ambition to transform those extreme challenges into her primary mechanisms for connection.
She wove a resilient net that facilitated her formidable toughness as an advocate. It demonstrates that the raw materials for resilience are often found in our greatest vulnerabilities.
But understanding the need for a safety net is one thing. Having the architectural blueprint for building it is another.
That's the hard part.
Right, but here's where it gets really interesting, because the book provides that exact blueprint. The 7 C's of mental resilience.
The toolkit.
This is the practical toolkit. If you're listening to this trying to figure out how to operationalize resilience, this framework is the absolute core of it. We can start by examining the first two, which function as a paired dynamic: competence and confidence.
They're deeply symbiotic, but require really careful calibration. Competence is the objective reality of your skill. It's knowing how to execute a task or navigate a situation.
Actually having the goods.
Exactly. Confidence, on the other hand, is your cognitive belief in that competence. And the text issues a sharp warning regarding how we typically pursue confidence.
Because we often mistake overconfidence for the real thing.
We do. But true, functional confidence is not walking into a room assuming your ideas are flawless. A truly confident person operates with the assumption that there might be critical flaws in their plan, but they trust their underlying competence to identify and correct those flaws in real time.
Overconfidence is just a fragile state of ignoring reality until the illusion shatters.
It's the difference between trusting your preparation versus assuming you're infallible.
And that internal stability naturally leads into how we interact with our environment, which brings us to the next 2 C's: connection and contribution.
Crucial pillars.
Absolutely. The book frames human connection not just as a pleasantry, but as a literal biological imperative. It references the survival rule of 3s. You can survive 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, but only 3 months without human contact before profound psychological degradation begins.
We are fundamentally social primates. Building a network of supportive ties provides a massive layer of psychological security. However, the text carefully distinguishes connection from codependence.
Right. You can't just rely on others to do the work for you.
You must retain the capacity for independent navigation. And this is where contribution acts as a counterbalance. Contribution is the act of offering your resources or assistance to others without expectation of a transaction.
Just giving back. And the psychological flip the author describes here is brilliant. When you contribute freely, you are subtly reprogramming your own cognitive biases. Well, by giving your time, you train your brain to recognize that helping someone else isn't inherently a massive, resented burden. Once you internalize that, it completely removes the friction when you inevitably need to ask for help.
Ah, that makes sense.
You stop viewing your own moments of weakness as an unfair imposition on your network because you know firsthand that helping feels good.
Precisely. It lubricates the entire social safety net. But relying on an external network demands a strong internal anchor, so you aren't simply swept along by the consensus of your group.
Which brings us to character.
Yes. In the context of mental training, character is your moral compass. It's the acute awareness of your foundational values, whether that is radical honesty, compassion, intellectual rigor.
Whatever your true north is.
Right. When your environment descends into chaos, knowing exactly what you value stabilizes your decision-making. You don't have to waste cognitive energy agonizing over a choice if one option clearly violates your core character.
Okay, let's unpack this with the final 2 components of the framework: coping and control. Coping is positioned as the real-time management of stress and perspective. And the text uses a fascinating anecdote about a commercial real estate landlord dealing with a slow elevator.
This is such a great example of reframing.
It really is. So the tenants were constantly complaining about the wait times for the elevator. The obvious brute force solution would be to spend a small fortune upgrading the elevator's motor to make it faster.
Which would cost millions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the landlord opted to install floor-to-ceiling mirrors in the lobby and play jazz music instead.
It is a masterclass in cognitive reframing. The landlord analyzed the situation and realized the friction wasn't actually the mechanical speed of the elevator. The friction was the psychological discomfort of boredom.
People just hated standing there staring at a wall.
Right. By installing mirrors, capitalizing on the fact that humans are very easily distracted by their own reflections, and altering the auditory environment, he completely changed the subjective experience of time passing.
He coped with the stressor by shifting the perspective, rather than attempting to wrestle with the unchangeable mechanics.
Which transitions seamlessly into the concept of control. Control, in this framework, is a strict boundary-setting exercise. It's acknowledging that attempting to manage external variables like macroeconomic trends, the weather, the opinions of your colleagues,
Traffic.
traffic, it's an exercise in futility. True control is recognizing that your locus of power rests entirely within your own responses, your focus, and your actions. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these 7 C's, competence, confidence, connection, contribution, character, coping, and control, they act as an interlocking diagnostic system.
So it's not just a checklist, it's a way to diagnose yourself.
Exactly. When you feel your mental fortitude degrading, it rarely means you're experiencing a total psychological collapse. It typically indicates that one specific pillar is bearing too much weight and needs reinforcement.
So if you feel directionless, it might be a prompt to re-examine your character and core values.
Right. Or if you're paralyzed by anxiety, you likely need to lean heavily on coping mechanisms or reach out for connection. It gives you a targeted way to troubleshoot your own mind.
So what does this all mean when we drag it down into the mud of a Tuesday evening, when you are exhausted and your willpower is completely depleted? The framework is elegant, but operationalizing it requires understanding the engine that drives our daily behavior, the habit loop.
The invisible engine.
The author grounds this in a physiological reality we often take for granted. Despite accounting for roughly 2% of our total body mass, the human brain consumes 20% of our metabolic energy.
It's an energy hog.
And if you look at a 5-year-old child, that developing brain is burning through up to 60% of their energy reserves. Conscious thought is incredibly metabolically expensive.
And that metabolic cost is the evolutionary reason habits exist in the first place. Your nervous system is constantly looking for ways to offload conscious decision-making to conserve energy.
It's trying to be efficient.
Exactly. If you had to consciously calculate every micro-adjustment of the steering wheel, every mirror check, and the exact pressure applied to the brake pedal while driving your route to work, you would arrive mentally exhausted.
Habits take these complex sequences and relegate them to automatic, low-energy background processes. The text maps out this system as a straightforward loop driven by a cue and a response. The classic example is your alarm clock rings, which is the cue. Your hand reaches out and hits the snooze button, which is the response.
We've all been there.
Right. And speaking as someone who has negotiated with an alarm clock on many mornings, it really isn't a conscious choice in that moment. It's just a pre-programmed script running to save the effort of waking up.
But this raises an important question. If the mechanics of a habit are that primitive, why do we experience such a profound failure rates when we try to eliminate destructive habits?
Why is it so hard to quit?
The author identifies a critical flaw in how we approach behavioral change, calling it the abstinence trap. The core philosophy is this: you cannot make a habit of abstinence.
The idea that abstinence cannot be habitual is a major paradigm shift. It completely explains the graveyard of abandoned New Year's resolutions.
Exactly. Abstinence is the act of actively restraining yourself from doing something, and that requires willpower.
Which we know is expensive.
Right. Willpower is not a magical, infinite resource. It's a form of conscious executive function, which means it burns that highly expensive metabolic energy we just talked about.
So if your entire strategy for quitting a bad habit relies on sheer willpower to simply stop executing the response, you are actively draining your energy reserves.
You will inevitably encounter a day where your stress is high, your energy is low, and the willpower required to maintain abstinence simply isn't there. You default to the deeply ingrained loop.
You cannot just delete the response and leave a vacuum. The book's methodology for hacking the loop is entirely about rerouting the track rather than ripping it up. You retain the exact same cue, but you attach a new, marginally better response that still satisfies the brain's craving for familiarity and reward.
The source material provides highly specific applications for this. Consider a teenager struggling to break a late-night pornography habit. The cue is the environment. getting into bed late at night.
Right. The cue is already set.
The response has been hardwired. If they simply lie in the dark attempting to use willpower to suppress the urge, the cognitive load will eventually break them. The author suggests replacing the response with something like reading a steamy romance novel.
Now, from a puritanical standpoint, that might sound like a lateral move. But neurologically, it is a highly strategic intervention.
It is strategic because it respects the established loop. It provides the sensual familiarity the brain's reward center is anticipating, meaning it doesn't require a massive expenditure of willpower.
But it shifts the behavior slightly closer to their actual values, engaging the imagination, interacting with long-form storytelling, and critically, moving away from the screen.
Over time, that new pathway can be shifted again, but the initial jump is manageable.
The book outlines a similar strategy for the modern plague of doom-scrolling or late-night texting. The cue is lying in bed, exhausted, with your phone illuminating your face. Instead of fighting the urge for stimulation, the suggested new response is to keep a notepad on the nightstand and write physical, handwritten letters to friends or family.
And you just take a photo of them and send them the next morning.
Exactly. It satisfies the psychological cue, that desire for connection and communication, but it forces the brain to wind down through a tactile, slower medium. Plus, it removes the stimulating blue light of the screen.
We can also apply this to dietary habits, which are notoriously difficult to break. Take the mid-afternoon fast food craving.
The classic 3 p.m. slump.
The cue is often situational, leaving a highly stressful meeting or hitting a specific intersection on the commute home. The craving for a high-calorie reward hits. Rather than white-knuckling the steering wheel as you drive past the restaurant, the intervention requires preparation.
You have to set the new track in advance.
Right. You stock the exact location where the craving hits, your desk drawer, or the center console of your car, with high-fiber, low-glycemic index snacks.
And just to contextualize that, low glycemic foods are crucial here because they don't cause the rapid spike and subsequent crash in blood sugar that processed fast food does.
Exactly. You're honoring the physical cue. Your body is demanding a reward in calories, so you provide it. But by supplying a substitute that stabilizes your blood sugar rather than disrupting it, you bypass the physiological crash that typically triggers the next cycle of poor decisions.
You're working with your biology rather than treating it like an enemy to be conquered. You are intentionally programming your autopilot.
Yes.
You utilize your 7 C's to determine your underlying values and the direction you want to travel. And then you hack your energy-conserving habit loops to incrementally align with those goals. It brings the entire methodology full circle.
It connects everything perfectly.
Resilience isn't an unfeeling suit of armor. It's your flexible, kintsugi-repaired safety net, supported by the pillars of competence, character, and control. And your habits are not insurmountable chains. They're just your nervous system trying to be efficient.
When you use the 7 C's to consciously design that efficiency, mental toughness ceases to be an exhausting, white-knuckle daily grind. It simply becomes the natural end state. You become the performer thriving on the high wire, secure in the knowledge of exactly how your net is built. When you cease fighting your own psychology and begin leveraging it, honoring the brain's demand for energy conservation, acknowledging your absolute need for connection and competence, you construct a genuinely formidable mindset. As the author notes early in the text, you stop aggressively arguing for your own limitations and start engineering your capacity.
I love that. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, extending the implications of everything we've unpacked today. We've been discussing this at the individual level, remapping personal neural pathways by slightly adjusting our responses to everyday cues.
But it scales.
Exactly. What happens if we scale that architecture? Imagine a family, a massive corporation, or even an entire society consciously auditing their collective habit loops to align with a shared value system.
That's a huge idea.
Could we eventually construct a true kintsugi culture? A society where our collective fractures, systemic failures, and shared traumas aren't papered over or hidden in shame, but are deliberately filled with gold, creating a community that is demonstrably stronger and more cohesive precisely because of where it was broken.
It is a potent concept to explore.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, and we highly encourage you to start assessing and building your own 7 C's today.